he was genuine, man. John Prine, if you ever met him, you thought he was a good friend of yours, instantly. He just had I think just even in his lyrics, any line in the song would almost make you feel like you know him. He had something about him. He was trusting in everyone. I went to see. He called me back in November of 19, or I guess the first week of December of 19. Billy Strings was playing a concert down here at the Marathon, and he said, Fiona's gone out of the country, and my son's gone doing something. He said, you want to go to this concert with me tonight? Billy Strings is playing, and I told him I'd go down there. I said, sure. I said, you want me to come pick you up? He said, yeah, that'd be great. So I go get him, and we go down there and pull around to the back door, and somebody lets us in, and they've got the balcony set up, for him, nobody else, but you got to go through the crowd. Everybody's standing up. It's like a Grateful Dead concert or something, So they lead Prine. We open the door, and everybody's like lit from the stage lights, their faces, and we're walking into the lit crowd, and Prine's right in front of me, and everybody's just like parting. Oh, John Prine! They back up, and it's like we were just moving through this crowd of a couple of thousand people, and he was like Jesus walking through the crowd. It was like, man, he's like I don't know, their God or something, It was like, man, it's kind of wild, just to feel everybody's love toward him, and they just opened up the sea of, faces to let him pass right through. And he was just like, hey, how you doing? He would speak to some folks, and we got to the balcony, and they had diet ginger ales and vodka, little Smirnoff vodkas, and his favorite drink was a Handsome Johnny, which was diet ginger ale and Smirnoff vodka and a twist of lemon. And so they had all that spread out with a cooler, and they brought hot dogs up there, like platters of hot dogs for me and him to sit up there and eat, just crazy stuff. It was like hanging out with the king, and we were overlooking the crowd. I got a great picture of me and Prine up there.
Well, I can just say this about his kindness. John Prine made every part of my life better. You don't do that with not being generous or being unkind or being frivolous in a funny way, but not in a flippant way. That's the kind of person he was, and he just always was. And if he liked you, or if he liked making stuff up here, vanilla milkshakes or whatever it was, he never changed an iota about that, because he would go back to those people or those things or whatever it was his whole life long. And that's just his honesty, kindness, if you want to put it that way. It's just he was truly a beautiful person. I was living in New York City, down in the Village, and I got to meet Kristofferson down there one time. Kris came over to my table at the Kettle of Fish one night. I was having dinner, and I never heard of Kristofferson. This is probably 1970 or 71 or something around in there. This guy came over, long stringy hair, and just looked down at me and he's, "Are you Keith Sykes?" I went, "Yeah. I'm Kris Kristofferson, man. I really like your album." I had one album out that time. And that's how I met Kris. And, as the months went on, he'd come into town and do things, and I'd meet back up. And I guess it was towards the end of the year, sometime in the fall. I can't remember exactly when, but he played a weekend that was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And Friday and Saturday, he played the bitter end, which it didn't hold but 100 people probably. It packed to the rafters, but it was packed. Both Friday and Saturday, you couldn't even get in. Changing sets, doing 2 or 3 shows a night. And on Sunday, it was relative quiet, and I went over there Sunday because the people that managed me that was their place, so I could get in anytime. And he said, I brought a couple of friends of mine from Chicago over here. I want to get up and do a guest set, so welcome John Prine. And Steve Goodman was there too, and I swear I don't remember a thing, because John got up and sang Donald and Lydia, Hello in There, and Sam Stone. And I just said, well, I quit. I mean, come on, what's the difference now? And so we met, and, we just met that night. And then a few months later, I was gone. The thing is so mysterious is I was gone 9 months of the year because I was on the coffee house circuit. So the whole time college was in, I played about 75 colleges a year back in those days because my management company owned the college coffee house circuit. That was their deal. So I was just working all the time. So, but anyway, I think John came in. That might have been when Kris was playing again or some other time. And we saw each other from across the room at the Kettle of Fish. I thought, well, I'm going to go say hi to him. And by the time I thought that, he was walking over towards me. So he remembered me and I remembered him. Of course, I wasn't going to forget him. But we just started talking like we were old buddies. And that just kept going. And every time we see each other, get a little bit closer. And then we run into each other on the road and just different places and just became friends. And, 15 years later, it dawned on us we'd never written a song. So, hey, you want to write a song? Yeah, let's do that. So that's when we started writing, was 1986. So that was 71 to 15 years before we even thought about writing a song. It never occurred to me because, there's John Prine, one of my heroes, and he became an instant hero. I mean, when I saw that night at the bitter end, it was just like, wow, and still is. But he always liked me and what I was doing too, which always blew my mind. And anyway, that's how we met. We were up there in this little room I'd rented, and he'd come around, we'd start to write it. And I had all this stuff, paraphernalia, publishing stuff, he'd pick up these old pitch sheets and stuff you get from the record companies and just around, who's looking at what, and, looking for something in the mid-tempo positive for so-and-so, And John was looking at one of those one day, and he just was reading it, and he looked up and he says, I'd eat a dog for a hit record. I thought, okay, I'll pass that along to these producers. I'm saying, you got anybody that would like to eat a dog? No, but he had that kind of sense of humor, and it was just so deadpan and natural, and he loved telling jokes. He introduced me to Roger Cook, who I just loved his work and fell in love with him as soon as you meet, was just one of those guys. But he loved to tell jokes, and he told them well, and so did Roger. So Roger told me this joke one time about this fly walks into a bar, and you can edit this out if you want to, and goes up to the bartender, and the bartender says, what do you have? And he says, I want a nice little bowl of shit covered with chopped onions and big frosty beer. And bartender says, coming right up. So he brings him out, and the fly just really enjoys it, man, leaves him a big tip and says, thank you, brother, man. And he flies on out. Next day, comes in, orders the same thing, beautiful. So he comes in, that weekend, and the bartender sees him across the crowd and says, nice little bowl of shit, chopped onions, big frosty beer. And he says, oh, no, man, hold the onions. I got a date tonight. And so Roger told me that when we were off doing something. So next time I ran into John, I told John, and John added the bit about he was doing his hands like flies do, And so 2 years ago, I saw Roger. I said, Roger, I told John that joke, and he just loved it, man. He's been telling everybody. He says, what joke? I said, the one about the fly. And he said, I don't remember a joke about the fly. And so I retold it to him, and he died laughing. So that's how those things went along. One time we were out, when I lived in Memphis, he was staying with us for a week or a weekend or whatever it was. He'd come down to Memphis all the time, and I'd go up and spend time at his house. It's just the way it was in those days. he had a 50 Ford two-door that he loved, and it was a cherry apple red, and all this stuff, and the mirror on the thing, the bullet mirror that you turn like this and all, it had all those gizmos on it. And I had a 50 Studebaker that was just plain, and I didn't try to fix it up. I just wanted, it ran great, but the cosmetics were just everywhere off the map. People would sign the hood, and I had a great Roseanne Cash because she really signed the crap out of it. It was big, and I thought, that's really cool. But so we'd follow each other back and forth to Memphis and those old things and just had fun. We were sitting outside on my patio, and we weren't saying anything. It's just one of those days, probably 86 degrees or just something. Really, everything was just so comfortable. And he just looked at me and says, man, we're going to be a couple of boring old farts, ain't we? I guess so, John. That's what we're destined to be all along. You may have seen this. It's a black guitar. It's got his name in big letters, John Prine. Okay. He was getting that inlay put in. And he went to this, he found a Lutheran who was going to do it. And he's going over there and wanted to kind of be there when he did it. And he said, finally, the guy just sort of he said, I'm going to have it done. He said, it's okay. Well, I'm really working on it. I'm still working on it. I've got this other stuff to do, and on like that. And John says, the guy never really got the fact that I just wanted to go over there and hang out with him. He just didn't seem to pick up on that. It's kind of like when I was there, I was sort of worrying him or something, And but I think only John would think in those kind of terms, His father took him and his brothers on a little vacation every year. I think he said he was either 13 or 14 the first time he went to John's boat dock. I mean, this same place that we go to. He started going up there when he was just a young kid, and I think that's the first place he played for anybody outside of his family. But he loved going fishing. Now, when I started going, it wasn't until 2012. I went up there one time before in the late 80s or early 90s. It was after I think it was before cancer or right after cancer or something like that. I was drinking pretty heavily in those days, and I didn't feel comfortable about being around that much family and showing all my cards. So I told Rogers, man, I'm going to slide on back home. But in 2012, he played my show in Hot Springs. And then I went back home and got my motorcycle and rode it back over there, which he loved the fact that I rode my motorcycle up to Mountain View. And anyway, that's the first time. And after one of the years, he's saying he's getting all of his stuff together, and his buddy John Earl and him would drive over. And I mean, they had a big SUV just packed. You couldn't get anything else in there if you tried. And he started just leaving a lot of the stuff at Brian's house. And he had a pretty big garage, so he could put stuff there, and then so he didn't have to pack it all the time. He'd just take it over the river and put it back in John's boat dock. But he loved doing that. But I can hear him say now, I was leaving, and Fiona says, "Don't forget your fishing pole," because he had everything else. I don't know. I just loved him. It's easy to see when you're looking at me that I love John Prine. But wasn't it terrific the love he got? Well, after he got back from cancer and went back on the road, that was astonishing the way the people showed up. And then the last few years, say the last 5 or 6, 7 years, it just was, I don't know, the people. All the young artists, the country artists that were coming up, started all quoting John Prine songs. And what was it he said? He said, I'm becoming a verb or noun or whatever it was, a verb, yeah, John Prine or Prine this or something. He was really proud of all that. But those kind of things where people like, I always said to Jareen or just anybody who listens, is people are finally putting John on the level I've had him at my whole life, since we met anyway. Because you look at those records, his best records, his worst record is really great. His best ones are just seamless, you know. I mean, it's just a whole ethereal thing. You know, how does that happen? You know, but he did it on his very first record, which in hindsight, you know, people say, what would you do over? And I say, I don't look back. But there is one place, if I'd have waited till I was 24, which is the age he was when he put his first record, rather than, I think I was 21 or something, or, you know, if I'd had just a little bit more seasoning, maybe I could have done something that would have been on the bottom rung of what he did, you know. Because he came out and, you know, Arif Mardin produced his first album. He also produced Norah Jones' first album. You know, that's just kind of a seamless, you just blindly put the needle down anywhere on it and it just pops out this magic, you know. There's no holes or no seams or there's nothing. It's just this thing that goes all the way through. And to think about those songs and just coming out, you know, on your first album while digesting Reader's Digest in the back of the dirty bookstore. Plastic flag with gum on the back fell out on the floor. Picked it up, wiped it off, and slapped it on my window shield. If I could see old Betsy Ross, I'd tell her how good I feel. I mean, come on, man. It just doesn't get any better to relate what millions of people are thinking and being able to say it like that. I mean, a lot of the stuff you pick up it's like a Hallmark greeting card. You know, or Jerry Jeff used to say, I love you more than God, or something like, you know, just, you're so astonishing and so ethereal and so beautiful, all these words, and it doesn't mean anything. And you just put a few little old sentences together like John did, and it means everything. I'm astonished every day when I think about his body of work. But
how did you hear about his passing?
Fiona called, and you know, she, you know, we knew he was sick. She called when he was sick, just to let some people know that, you know, his people, which I'm sure took a long time because he had a bunch of people, you know. But happily, I was one of those people, and so it just. And then on the day he died, she called and, you know, said he was gone. And anyway, it was a very sad day. It was sad when he got that stuff. And you know, there was no vaccines, there was no boosters, nobody knew anything. It's just people got it, and before you knew it, they were in the thick of it. And people that really got that stuff, hardly anybody lived. And they said, oh, it just takes old people and people who have all these pre-existing conditions and stuff. John, he had a lot of issues, but he was healthy. He's a horse. I mean, he'd tell you that. I feel great. I feel good. You know, I'm sure he had days when he was maybe fudging some. We all do. But that stuff was just too much for him. And how many ever millions and more. It's awful.
Were you on the fishing trip where they scattered his ashes?
I was. I think there's about 10 of us or so, you know. There's two guys that live up there that are just so beautiful, great people. Brian Holmes and Jim Ross. And they have boats. And great friends of John's. I met them both through John. But anyway, when John died, of course, we couldn't get together for a couple of years or something, but however long it was. And we finally got where we get up there, and we went up to, took the boat up the White River. It's a pretty good trip up there. I don't know how many miles it is or anything like that, because it's on the water. And if you're going 30 miles on the water, it feels like you're doing 120 in a car or something. But we go up for a long way, and there's this place which I call the John Prine Grotto. And it's this, if you're heading up north, it'll be on your west side. And it just comes down this waterfall. It's just running all the time. And it's beautiful little palisade and mossy and rocks and just gorgeous. And you go through these trees that are falling down in this little tunnel to get up there to it. And we all went there and just sort of hung out, just thinking about John. And Brian's wife has given us all a rose apiece, 1 rose apiece. So when we left there, we went out to the middle of the river and just shut the engine off. There's 2 boats of us. And, or was it just, 2 boats of us. And we, and Roger Cook had a little plastic bag of John's ashes and put it in a little cup with a spoon, and we could all take a spoon and each scatter a little bit. And we said a little piece about John and did that. But we tossed the roses in first. And the roses just stayed with us the whole way, the whole trip back down to John's boat dock. They go way away, and then they come right up back to the boat. And they did that. And, it takes a pretty good little bit. It takes 30 to 45 minutes, I guess, to float down to see those roses come in and back. And we finally get out, and the river really gets wide there where we were going to stop. And that's what they went on. And but we all felt John. We all had a handsome Johnny that night eating. That's what was gin and tonic, or not gin and tonic. It's vodka and ginger ale. That was it. And the band started calling them Handsome Johnnies because every night after the show they'd have a little powwow and they'd drink one, and so it was just I guess saying goodbye to John in that way. But man, I tell you what, I visit him every day, just about.
I met John Prine up in Canada in 80 something or other, maybe at Winnipeg, I think it was, maybe in 89. There was a guy that I'd already met, was this fellow Jim Rooney. And Jim Rooney is this great guy. He was a friend of Neuwirth's, and Bob Neuwirth's a friend of mine. So when Rooney came out to LA one time, I met Rooney. And I was hanging out with Rooney a bunch and picking and stuff. And there was this big super party out in LA in the late 80s. It was the whole Boston folk scene. And so Rooney was there, and me and Neuwirth went over and we met, played a song for Eric Von Schmidt. The thing with Neuwirth was that we wrote a song and then we went on a tour around LA just playing the song one-on-one to people. That was the tour. Because that was kind of like Neuwirth's thing, was like a lot of his songs were either like seductions, like meant to be played late at night to one person, which is a really high level of the art. And also one-on-one songs with a message for people. And so we wrote the song called Power, Lust, and Money, and then we went on a tour around LA playing it for everybody. We played it for Eric Von Schmidt, who was in town for this big party. Rooney was there for the big party, and I think Mimi Farina was there for the big party, Mimi Baez, and Fritz Richmond and Jeff Muldaur was there, and Debbie Green, if you know who that is, she's a great folk singer. Bruce Langhorne was there playing, and it was just a great party, and it went on all night long. And I kept Neuwirth, we were going to play the song, and Neuwirth kept on going, wait, now, no, wait. And anyhow, we finally played the song at like 4 a.m. to these people, and like it was the perfect moment to play Power, Less Than Money. But anyhow, so right after that, I went up to Winnipeg, and Rooney was up there. And so I told Rooney, we were all going up there, and I told Rooney, I had a band on, with me, and we'll back you up at the folk festival. So we started backing up Rooney, and we hung out up there. And so I guess John was up there, and I met him up there, but just in passing, So then I'm on tour later, just solo, or I don't know how much later, because it's all kind of a blur, but I played the Bluebird on part of this tour. I guess it was the Blue Guitar Tour. And the front table was reserved, and the place of the club was pretty full, but there was just this one table right in the middle up front that was reserved, or like maybe one table back, and it was reserved. And then John Prine came in alone, and they just like put a bottle down there and like a glass, and like he just sat there and he watched my set, which made me fairly, as you can imagine how you'd feel, but it was great in a way too, And then somehow I can't remember what happened, but we talked on the telephone, and I went up there to write. So that's when I started writing with him. I read right after that gig. But he was a real sweet guy. It was like a kind of a lot. There's not a whole lot. He's different than a lot of the people you meet in music. He was very aware of other people. It wasn't all about him, and so he was aware of other people and the way they feel, and he was just aware of people. And I suppose like Hello in there, like sort of says it all, that he was aware of that early on about older people that he would see. It's similar to that, and he would be like that with everybody, but. He was really funny too, and like he was going through a difficult period in his life, I think, and he had gone through a divorce recently, and you've heard all the stories about the model train set up in the dining room and all that kind of stuff. Christmas tree was up, all year round and all this kind of stuff. He cooked, did you know about that? And like he cooked, he was a really good, he could make like these great, like he made a pot roast one night when I was up there, in a big bag, and he had all these spices and And he'd stay up really late, and he would do the dishes, and he'd be over there like doing the dishes and like looking out the window, and then he would say something like, he'd look at you and he'd like have a towel, and he's like doing a dish, and then he'd be like, let's write a song like Sink the Bismarck about some imaginary heroes. You know what I mean? That was it. And so we wrote this thing called Wonderful 99. Like Sink the Bismarck was like my favorite song when I was like 8 or 7 or whenever it was Johnny Horton had that hit with it. I loved Sink the Bismarck. So I don't know how he knew. It was a song I loved. Like, I loved Johnny Horton, but I loved Sink the Bismarck. I don't know. I was a little kid, It blew me away. And so like we wrote the Wonderful 99 about these imaginary heroes that have a smart bomb that doesn't work, so they deliver it by hand. And it's this whole really stupid song. I mean, it's a funny song. It was a joke song. And we had a lot of laughs writing it. And then I recorded it and played it for him after I recorded it, put it on the album, It was, it was like a good laugh, And then one weird thing that happened was that I was staying over at this guy's house in Nashville, Fred Kohler. You know Fred? Fred's a songwriter that like co-wrote with like a million different people up through the 80s. I don't know where he is now. He's probably co-writing with somebody still. I just haven't been keeping up with it, but he was a guy that wrote with everybody, he was one of those Nashville songwriters. I couldn't even tell you all the people he wrote with, but he was one cool thing about Fred Kohler was like his advice: if you want it, like songwriters need to read books, and he was a book guy, and he said had a bookstore out in Santa Cruz at one point, but he was a folk singer and all that kind of stuff. Played slide guitar a lot and stuff. But he was a songwriter. But I was at his house, and he had 1 million books. And one of the books was a book I'd never read called Mystery Train by Greil Marcus. And so I'm like, I had to stay at his house. I needed a place to stay, so he's let me sleep on a couch or something. And it's in this room with all these books. Like, Mystery Train, well, that's one of my favorite songs by Elvis. I love it. So I'm start reading the book. It was a pretty interesting book. But it was kind of disturbing in a way, too, that kind of rock criticism is kind of... if you're actually a musician, it can feel it feels like somebody's trying to be God, and you've been consigned to like one of the rings of hell by by like this guy that's like playing Dante, and so this is what rock criticism feels like to me. It's like they want to assign everybody somewhere between the ninth circle of hell and the paradise, like some and it's just bullshit, because like who are they to like make these calls? But they don't make them with much humility. And Greil Marcus, who does write some, I've found a few things by him to be really interesting. Like he's got like a really great piece in a book about. He has a book about Shape of Things to Come, I think it's called, and it's about prophets. And I really like to study prophets. Like I'm reading a book right now about. The prophets, in the Bible and everything. I find that really interesting. I like Hasidic literature too a lot, and I like Martin Buber, and I like all that kind of stuff. I like it a lot. And then our man Greil wrote a really great piece that stands out in one of 2 or 3, in my opinion, that stands out in his career. because I'm going to assign him his place in hell too. I have almost no use for most of it, but that's a great piece. The first piece in there about America and what America means is like an antidote to where we're at right now, and it's like a very beautiful piece in the shape of things to come. Nobody's going to read it from my because I say so, but it's good. In that book, Mystery Train, he said, a great artist has to have a great audience. Huh. Great artist must have a great audience. So I go over there and John's like standing there by the sink doing some dishes. I go, John, I was like, I think everybody's cooking or getting things ready and doing, so at the sink down. I'm like, I was over at Calder's, man. And like, he had this book and it was by this guy, Grail Marcus. And it's like, it said something about like a great artist has to have a great audience. John just turns at me and like looks at me and I'm like, sorry, man. I just felt really ashamed to be quoting that kind of shit. It's just so irrelevant. And so just like, he just looks at me like that's the stupidest thing I've ever fucking like, what are you talking about? And so then he goes, like a little while later, we're sitting there and like he had this song he wanted to write. Every guitar player, a lot of guitar players have a thing like when you open up a guitar case and you take out a guitar, there's a riff or a thing that you play that like you play. Do you have like this, like a thing like you pick up a guitar and you go, it's like something, right? And a lot of times it's nameless, but he had this one and it's like this melody and he's been playing it his whole life and he's never written words for it. So he goes, I think we can write the great 3-chord love song if we could just write the words to this, Okay. So we start trying to listen to it and figure out how to do it. And like, we're just sitting there like nothing. It's just like hopeless. We play it. And then we were playing the song Log Train on the Hank Williams. You ever heard Log Train by Hank Williams? So we're playing that. Like we played that a lot. I don't know why. We just kept on, put on Log Train again, We're like, listen. We kept on putting on Log Train. And then put on Log Train again, man. Yeah. And I don't know what we were looking for in Log Train, but then like John's hanging out there and we're sitting there and he goes, let's write a song about the first monkey that ever went into outer space and what he's been doing since his 15 minutes of fame ran out. And that song just like wrote itself. We just sat down and like started laughing and wrote the Space Monkey song, and it was about 2 a.m. We got it done, and he calls up Al Bonetta at like 2 a.m. Al comes over. He must not have lived far away, I guess, or something. I was there a few times, but at least one of the times Al came over in the middle of the night to hear the new song. These guys were so funny, man. They were great. They were just such beautiful guys. And so, and John was just like a really, he was a beautiful person. He's saintly, he was loving. He was merciful. He was all that stuff. So, he wasn't a hardball player,
I did a Writers in the Round with Lucinda at the Mariposa Folk Festival, late 80s, early 90s, and Prine was there, and because I can play with people, I know how to do it and not get in the way. I got to play Paradise with him. And there's not a better song than Paradise, and that was just an absolute thrill. And then he played a gig one time, and I was in Chicago and had the night off, and he played a gig in like the Chicago Opera House. Maybe it was an old ornate theater. It was really, really nice. And of course, he sold it out in Chicago, and I was in the dressing room. At the end of the show, it's a heavy-duty union place, fines for going over the curfew, and he finished his last song, and not the encore yet, but he got back in there, and someone connected with the building or the venue said, "John, you have like 2 minutes and 50 seconds And otherwise, it's going to be a $25,000 fine. So you have to, if you go out and play a song, you're going to have to make it a real short one. And I said, John, don't you have a $25,000 song? And he said, I might have a couple of 12,500 ones I could play. He went out and played 2 minutes and 49 seconds and got in under the wire somehow.
But I want to say how I met John Prine, which is having known Steve a little bit. There was Prine at the Edmonton Folk Festival. He's backstage hanging around with members of the band. It was, as it existed at that point, Rick Danko and Garth Hudson and I think Richard Manuel were there. Anyway, so they're all hanging around, and I got the gumption up to go up to John Prine and say, hey, I'm a friend of Steve Goodman's. I said, I just wanted to say I really love your music. And Steve, I know you were really close to Steve, and we missed Steve. It was only a year or two after he had died. And Prine said, Steve is doing really good. He's got a new record out, and he just won a Grammy or something, He said, don't worry about Steve. But that's how I met John, and he was just like an old shoe. He's like a regular guy. It was disarming that way because he's kind of a songwriting god, an American icon of the arts, and he's really easy access. And it's just like you got to swallow hard to not kind of fawn all over the guy because you don't want to ruin it, I didn't want to press myself on him or anything, but I, always check in with him. So, but then he was a fan. He was always aware of what you were doing, and he was always following the music. And Hot Rise was on a reunion tour, I think 2014 or something, and maybe a little after that. And we played at the Station Inn, and I look over there. Here's Prine sitting on the last seat in the house on the far left, He said, I've never seen you guys. I always wanted to see you. And he actually, snuck in the back door and sat right down there and watched the whole show. It's, makes you feel good. But, I got to participate on a couple recordings. One was when he made a duet project with Mac Wiseman. And Mac was another guy that I knew, I'd go to Earl Scruggs' house for his birthday parties, and all these guys would be there, including Mac, or maybe Lester Armistead's Country Store. He had a place up in Goodlettsville that was kind of like an old store, and have jam sessions up there, and all the Scruggs and Mac Wiseman, Jim and Jesse, they'd all be up there. So I knew Mac, and so then my buddy Dave Ferguson, was producing this record with John and Mac. And they had a little table, like almost like a little dinner table, and they'd put these desk stands, microphone stands on them, like a little disc with the thing, and then it's just like this tall. So they're sitting there with the lyrics in front of them, singing, facing each other, with two mics, and then the band, be close around them playing. So I got to play guitar on 2 or 3 songs, and then. Later, when he was doing a second version of the In Spite of Ourselves, whatever the duets with female artists, Kathy Mattea is another associate that I've worked with over the years and been helped greatly by. And she was recording a duet. And one of them was Dreaming My Dreams of You by Alan Reynolds. Or is it by Alan Reynolds, or we're in Alan's studio recording his song, and Kathy and I. Anyway, I'm looking through the glass at the two of them. They're in the same isolation booth singing on the same mic, I think. And I actually have a little short video clip of them singing, warming up, snuck that. John, he loved all the old music, I saw him. What's great about Prine is when I moved to Nashville, I would take the kids, my sons are all grown now, but at the time in 96 and 7, they were in just starting grade school and just starting high school. They're 8 years apart. And so I go drop them off at their school. And then oftentimes I go, if I had a grocery shop, I'd do that then. And so, it's like 8:15 in the morning. I'm going up to the egg aisle, and there's Prine, And that's the thing. He's the guy you'd see in the egg aisle.
Did you see him at meeting threes around town?
Yeah. You'd see him at down here at the Copper Kettle, which is the closest one to my house, and he's signed on the wall, Meat Loaf Wednesday, John Prine, and then at Arnold's for sure. And then when he had a record release for that second Duets record, and he took everybody out to eat at Arnold's. That was great. Yeah, I would have loved to cook for him. I invited him over here, and as Fiona said, they wanted to come over here sometime, but they just never. I would have a picking party on January 1st a number of years, and it was kind of open house. It got a little wild after a while, but they threatened to come by, but never did. The Jim Rooney and the Irregular shows were always great because whoever it was Rooney's a friend of Rooney, that's a wide palette there. They would come by and he might get them up on stage. And John Prine was definitely a regular participant there. And, he'd get up and play a song. He might play like My Bucket's Got a Hole in It, and then he might do one of his songs. But the first time I saw that happen was the Hodam family. That was like a once a year gig. They were, I think they played at a place called the Box Seat, and it was over in Green Hills, like a little bar, and they just started at 5 in the afternoon and went till midnight. It was just like this long jam, and it was like about 15 people on stage, and they're all really highly qualified and ultra tasteful. It seemed like, and that's what the Irregulars gigs are like. It would be all these great musicians, could have been A-team players like Dave Pomeroy and, Dan Dugmore and Pete Wasner and all these players. And it was way too many people to make sense. And yet it sounded perfect because they were so ultra tasteful. I remember going to the Station Inn and going, man, whoever's mixing this gig is a genius, because how can you do this? And then I looked at the soundboard. There's nobody there. And Richard Bailey played banjo with him every time, and he was the guy that set it up. He said, "Yeah, we don't need to mix stuff. People know, they're playing mixing. People playing on mics and pianos coming through directs, but they're just geniuses themselves. The musicians here, you come to Nashville and." A guy described it to me. He said, you run around a track around your hometown, think you're doing pretty good, make a pretty good time. Come to Nashville and you realize, man, you got to up your game a lot, People are lapping you all the time. So it really is true. You learn about timing because you just have to. You learn about taste and dynamics, It's a lesson. It's a hard lesson to learn. Those are supreme lessons, though. And Nashville is contagious. You got to learn or give it up. One of the great shows I saw was at the Romp Festival up in Owensboro, Kentucky. They had them on a Saturday night, and I'd play with my group, and then everybody stayed around to hear John. And it's just like, I don't know. That was really great to hear him in Kentucky, kind of nearby where he's from, really. It's just one county away, I think. Muhlenberg County, that's like a pretty heavy-duty place. He knew about, his parents knew about his relatives, aunts, and everybody knew about Bill Monroe and Merle Travis and all that being around there. His great aunt or something said, we always thought Bill Monroe and Charlie Monroe were like mafia guys or something, because they'd come around in these big cars and fancy suits, coming back to Rosine, Kentucky. What the heck are these guys into now? At that same festival up there at Romp, there was a security guard named Mark Schultz, black man, and I think he was a deputy sheriff, or maybe he was a policeman in the county or whatever. And somebody said, "Oh, this is Arnold Schultz's grandnephew or something." And Arnold Schultz is a guy that played with Bill Monroe's Uncle Pen and with Bill Monroe and taught him how to play rhythm guitar. He taught this guy Mose Rager, who how to play guitar, and Mose taught Ike Everly and Merle Travis. I mean, the guy's Arnold Schultz is like the unsung father of country music that we don't know about. We know about DeFord Bailey being a black man. He was an early star of the Opry and so influential, but we don't know so much about Arnold Schultz. There's no recordings of him, but you can feel the reverberations of his influence through these people, the Everly Brothers, Bill Monroe, every bluegrass thing, every Chet Atkins lick you hear. You know, it's really kind of comes from this guy. And he was a railroad worker that was itinerant. Apparently would go oft times to New Orleans during the winter months. When he came back in the spring, they said you could hear him through the woods. He'd be walking around with his guitar just playing as he went. And you knew he was back in town. So that's pretty cool. And Bill said he played dances with him, and they'd, come home at sunup. They'd break the dance up at sunup and ride home on their horses. But anyway, so he met this guy, Mark Schultz. And I said, well, so what do you know about your Uncle Arnold? He said, well, my grandfather and him had a band, and my grandfather kept his band going. And he showed me a picture of them, and they had drums and guitar and I think piano. So they probably played dances and stuff. And he said, well, I said, well, where is he buried? And he said, he's down in Rosine, which is where Bill Monroe's from. He said he's at the graveyard on the other side of the tracks. I said, well, okay. After the festival, the next day, my wife Jan and I went down there to find his grave. So we go to Rosine. It's really funny because we're trying to find this other graveyard. I've been to the graveyard where Bill and Charlie Monroe are and their parents, brothers and sisters, but there didn't seem to be any other graveyards. So we're kind of leaving, and we see this woman on the side of the road. She's got on her bathrobe, and she looks like to be about 80 years old, and she's got a cigarette, and she's in her bathrobe out by the street. And we stopped and asked her, said, do you know where the other, maybe the African-American graveyard is? She said, oh, there's no African-American graveyard here. There's only the one up here on the hill. And that led to a discussion of, I said, well, I see Bill Monroe up there. She said, oh, Bill Monroe. Everybody pays so much attention to Bill Monroe, but we have these people that died in the wars, and they don't give them any kind of big sign or anything, And so we talked to her, and she had the cigarette, the ash is about that long. She's just taking it real slow and telling us all this stuff about the little town. So we figured, what the heck, this is not the right place for Arnold's grave. So then we go and look. There's this thing called the internet. We looked it up on the internet after we got back to where there was service, because Rosine has no cell phone service for AT&T, apparently. So then we find out it's in Morganton, Kentucky. So we drive over there, and there's an African-American graveyard, and it's just no markers, just rocks, just little, rocks about this big marking graves. And but somebody had put up a memorial, a nice, quite a large stone sculpture with, a tribute to Arnold and how he started this thumb picking style that's so popular in Kentucky. And Arnold Schultz he's a great enigma. And it's telling that his grandnephew didn't realize, he thought he was buried in Rosine. He knew where Rosine was. That's interesting to me, because he knows where Rosine is. He knows that Bill Monroe's from there, and he knows that there's that connection. So he just assumes he's buried there, but he's not. I think at first I heard that Fiona was sick with COVID, and then found out that she got better, and he got diagnosed, and then he went in the hospital. They were over in Europe and coming back, and got back home, and she was real sick, and then he followed her in the hospital and died. So I don't know how I found out. I think I found out just by the internet somehow, real quick in the morning. It was real early on in the pandemic, mid-April or something. And It's like, okay, this is real. We're losing people right and left, and there's no sense to it. There's no, right and wrong about this. They shouldn't be taking John Prine, but he's just as vulnerable as anybody. And even though the world should be protecting somebody like John Prine from any kind of danger, we're all vulnerable to this. And but it was just so tragic. It's like, this is somebody I knew, somebody who had encouraged me, somebody who personally encouraged me, but also just the very nature of his music and the fact that it was there was encouraging. Just somebody like that to pass, it's like, oh, this is really one of the great tragedies of our time that we're facing here. And it's going to be worse before it gets better than it was.
Oh yeah, he knew where every good meatloaf was, and what day it was, and what. I'd call him and say, "You want to go to lunch tomorrow?" And he goes, "Yeah, let's go to Arnold's. It's Meatloaf Wednesday." Or I'd call him one day and he'd say, "Yeah, it's Meatloaf Day at Wendell Smith's." He knew where every day of the week where there was meatloaf. He loved it. Meatloaf, double order of meatloaf, double order potatoes and bread and sweet tea. Yeah, he was in heaven. Every time he went to the hospital, when he get out of the hospital, I'd make banana pudding for him, and he'd call up and say, "Where's my fucking pudding, man?" So I'd have to make him up a big batch of banana pudding. He loved it, and he'd sneak it in around Fiona, because it's just sugar, it's just terrible for you, And I'd make him meatloaf too. I'd make him meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and he could warm it up, and he loved all that stuff. I cooked for him a bunch. I used to play cards at John's. John wouldn't even start playing cards till midnight or 1, and then play cards. Guy Clark would be there, and Pat McLaughlin and Towns sometimes would be there. There was dealer's choice always. Dealer's choice got to call the game, and there was all kinds of silly games like high-low Chicago on Tuesday or some shit like that, where it's some rules that were almost impossible to keep up with. Deuces wild after you get a 2, after you get a 3, or some crazy thing like that. But there were some great card games, and really good ones. John would cook. He would cook chicken legs on his grill. And many times we'd be there hanging out, drinking and stuff, and John would start the grill, charcoal grill. And before he put any meat on it, the fire was already out. I forgot to do it, and then he'd start over again. And sometimes it'd take him 2 or 3 times to get it done. But he had made the best chicken legs. He cooked chicken legs, and he made his own barbecue sauce out of K-Roll syrup and some other stuff. But it was just great. Really good.
So who were the good poker players amongst that crowd?
Oh, John was good. McLaughlin's always good. The guy in Towns were good at playing cards. All them guys from Texas are good at playing cards. They love to play cards. But and I don't want to mislead anybody like there was a card game over there every night or something. But there was a few card games where those guys were all there, and it was fun. I first met Prine at Cowboys when I started to work for Jack Clement in 1980, late 81 or early 82. Prine was a fixture. He was a fixture in there. He'd come through and hang out at Cowboys, and he'd drive. At the time he had a 58 Porsche. Little black Porsche. That thing was incredible. Now it'd be worth no telling what. And he would drive that thing around, and he'd come in and hang out at Jackson, play songs and stuff. He was just a great hang, the guy was. Just a friendly guy. I went on boating excursions with John here in Nashville. He gave me 2 boats. He gave me 2 boats. He gave me this one boat. It was orange and white, and it was about a '72 model Larson or something, about an 18-foot boat. It had about like 100 horse Johnson on it or something, or a Chrysler engine. And every time we ever went out on it, it broke down. He just said, you can have it. Just take it. And so I took it and used it for a while, and it just kept breaking. I mean, it never was dependable. And so I know the Reno brothers, Don Wayne and Dale and those guys. I gave it to them. I gave it to Dale Reno, him and Don Wayne. And then years later, John bought a boat from Albinetta. He bought this boat from Albinetta, and it ran great. It just needed, it just needed some new upholstery work, right? And so John went and put it in at Percy Priest Lake, which is outside of Nashville a little ways, and had it in a slip and took the trailer home with him, or we took the trailer back to his place, so he'd be able just to go ahead and put the key in it and go. So we put it in there. So in the spring, it was a beautiful day. I remember it was a beautiful day. He said, he said, I want to go get that boat out of the water and take it and get it reupholstered. And I said, okay. So we hook it up to his pickup truck, hook the trailer up. We go out there, and me and John go get in the boat, or John gets in the boat. I'm backing the trailer down, and John gets in the boat, and I see him, he starts it, and I see him looking around down the bottom of the boat like this as he's driving in. And by the time he got over there to us, he was knee deep in water. The freeze plug had come out, and the faster he ran, the more water was coming in the boat. Luckily, there were some John Prine fans right there at the ramp and helped us wrestle this thing in. And then we tied it on the trailer, get up the road, and the trailer had a flat, and the rim was bent. So I called my sister, bring a hammer around to fix the rim on the boat. Anyway, so he takes it home, has a guy come over and take the interior out of the boat to redo it. Guy disappears into thin air. Took $500 of John's money and the interior of the boat and disappears into thin air. And John says, "You can have the boat." He said, enough, uncle. And so Mike Bubb wound up with that boat. Then let's see, I went through some boating things with Prine, and the last boat he owned, he went and bought a brand new boat that looked like a brand new red Cadillac. It was a beautiful boat, and we went up the river in it, and that was the last boat ride I ever went on with John. It was about, I don't know, a year or so before he passed away, I think. About 3 years ago.
What would he like fishing for? Like, was he a fly fisherman?
No, he was. He liked catching trout. I think that's what they fished for, mainly down there on the White River. But I think he liked the camaraderie more than anything. I mean, he'd go down on those, and they'd play cards, down at there, or play music and play cards and stuff on those fishing trips and drink a bunch. He always tried to get me to get him a quart of moonshine to take down there with him, and I would. I'd find him a quart, and Roger Cook, you know who Roger is. Roger always go on those things, and Jim Rooney, and Shawn Camp would go on some of them, and Joe Allen, John Earl, and I don't even know what John Earl's name is. Maybe John Earl. It may be both of his names. John, I don't know his last name. Maybe Earl, or maybe his middle name. I don't know. But John always wanted him to go because he fried the chicken. And that was very important to John to have the good fried chicken down there. So he had no ego. I mean, that I ever saw. I mean, he never flashed his ego at anybody I ever saw, or at me, it was never one of those things like, damn it, I'm John Prine, I want this to happen. It was never that. I never got that out of him, and never, he was always friendly to people, his fans, he was a friendly, nice man, and he was funny. He was a really funny guy with a different slant on things, but he was a humble guy.
I think I met him at the Holdam family Christmas show, which I was a member of the Holdam family. There was like 17 of us or something. I was little Shawnee Holdam. He was little Johnny Holdam. And that was a Christmas show we did every third Saturday of December, for a while. And it was a great band, just filled up with a bunch of crazies. And Roy Husky Jr. played bass, and Larry Hardiker played drums. We called him Hop Sing. He wore a little Japanese-looking hat or something, and I played fiddle, and Dave Ferguson would play some, and Jim Rooney, John Prine, and Pat McLaughlin, and Mike Henderson played some, and Jamie Hartford would come and play, and I don't know, it was a huge blur. Everybody might have been drinking a little bit of something or something, during those days, but it was a little bit of a wild party kind of atmosphere, So that's probably where I first met Prine, and I remember going to that Thanksgiving the first time to his house and playing poker with him, and probably the first year I met him, and but John Prine was here a lot, coming and going, and that's another one I waited years really after meeting Prine. I knew of a few of his songs, but I didn't want to be too, like blown away by him, because he was a personal friend, so I didn't want to soak up his musical greatness for a while. I don't know why. I just wanted to know him, rather than know all these great songs that I knew he had. I just didn't want to gush about how talented he was. He was something else. But time rocked on. Eventually, I did a little record for a Live at the Station Inn album, and I gave it to Oh Boy Records as a lease deal where I would get it back. But they put me on the road with Prine, opening a few shows with him, and that was fun to see his crowd, and what a great guy, man. We went to Arnold's several times, and if he was there, I'd always end up just sitting with him, or he would sit with us, I remember I took my dad to Arnold's on his 70th birthday, and with my mom, the three of us walk in, and as we're sitting down, Prine comes in, and he sat down with us. It was my dad's birthday. It was just like, I don't know that he had ever met my folks, but they hit it off. And he was just a good old boy.
Did you go fishing with him?
He invited me to go fishing several times, and it seemed like all these big world events that would happen that he would invite me to do, like something would happen that it would fall apart with me and Prine. And he asked me to go play the Letterman show with him in New York City, and that was years ago. And we're ready to go, and the day we were supposed to leave, Letterman had a heart attack, and so Prine got canceled. And he's like, "Oh man, if I ever get booked back, you're going with me," But something always fell apart. Well, then he invited me to go up to the White River in Mountain View, Arkansas, which I'm from Arkansas. He wanted me to come up there and go fishing with him and Jim Rooney and Roger Cook and Keith Sykes, and there's a slew of guys that he used to hang out with. Charles Cochran, great piano player. Well, we were getting ready to go, and Charles Cochran had a car wreck and got killed. So that week got canceled. And every other time I would be on the road or something when they decided to go. And I went up there finally in 2019. He called me to go, and so we talked on a Sunday night. We were going to leave the next morning at 10 a.m. on Monday to get over there at the same time. And I was taking my dad, and we went over there. When we get there, Prine's nowhere to be seen, And so we find out he's sick and in the hospital, and he don't make it, but all of his friends are there, And That place was his favorite place. The first place he had played to a live audience or in front of people. He was 14 years old when his family went there on vacation, and so he came back a couple times a year for a week at a time or something, and would go fishing and write songs. And so when he passed back in the first week of May this year, we all met up there, and 9 of us, and scattered his ashes out on the White River, or some of his ashes. It was pretty powerful, for sure. But he pulled us together, all that crew. You know, it was a lot of Cowboys family, you know, but some of his friends too. You know, John Earl and Brian Holmes was our fishing guide over there. So I've met a lot of friends through Prine, for sure. I just think he had an open, loving heart, and he was just an open book, you know. And he had a quirky personality and had a wild way of saying things that drew folks in, you know. And if you listen to his songs, you knew him.
We met John Prine the very first European trip we ever did. We flew over to Oslo, Norway, to play this festival called Down on the Farm that went for many years. It was great. And like the Derailers were over there. Our first records were out, you know. And it was headlined by John Prine. I think the old 97s were playing too. And John Prine was there. He was the headliner. So we're in Oslo, and this Down on the Farm was like outside of Oslo. I don't know, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours to get there. And we were all just giddy excited, but also jet lagged, you know, just kind of feeling, you know, the sun never goes down. Oh, Jimmy Dale Gilmore was on that too. And Fred Eaglesmith, because they were in the bar. Every time we walked into the hotel, those two guys were at the bar. And no matter what time of day it was. And it was great. And we got along great with those guys. We had a few beers with them. And but I went upstairs into my room, and there was a knock on my door, and I opened up the door, and it was John Prine. And I'm like, hi, John Prine. What are you doing? He goes, I just wanted to say, you know, I really like what you guys do, and would you autograph my CD? And he had Live from Roberts. And I'm like, I'd be happy to, John Prine. What do I do? You know, like, what do you do to that? Yeah. You know, and he stayed there, and we chatted for a second, and then I said, well, thanks. And he's like, well, I'll see you around. You know, we're going to be playing the show and everything. Okay. And then I never saw him again. You know, I saw him play, which was always like incredibly surrealistically moving. But it's like, I really wish I could have, you know, pursued that a little more. And, you know, there's a lot of those things that we had access to back in those BR days, but we were so stupid and up our own asses that we didn't take advantage of it. I could have said to our manager, Barry, I could have said, Bazza, can you get me a writing appointment with Waylon Jennings? That would have happened, you know, but I didn't. And this is one of those things, it's a great regret of mine because, you know, John Prine is one of those people that surpass almost everybody. He's one of those people that have just a little bit more alien DNA than the rest of us, you know, like Bob Dylan, you know, like Willie Nelson. Those guys, they're more alien than we are. He had a thing about him that was just so unassuming and yet wise. And, you know, he's not like number one smash hit mega superstar, and yet he is. And plus, our management company was in the same like little strip on Music Row as Oh Boy Records. So, you know.
For me, it's all about studying the heroes of your heroes. Like that's a thing I try to impart to young songwriters, travelers, art makers, you know. And in the case of John Prine, it's like he's like a huge influence on all of us, and therefore on more than just songwriters. Just like it's a worldwide thing. Like his calm, comedic appreciation of the human condition, right? So I'm a street musician in Ireland in the late '80s. I'm hitching around Ireland. It's a very accepted form of transportation. I go to Galway Arts Festival. Dr. John's playing it. Mick DeVille, guy named John Prine's there. I'm like, John Prine, the guy, Sam Stone. These are songs where you're like, these are novels, these are movies and songs. You're like, oh my gosh, John Prine's there. Turns out he's been hanging out there for a while. He's meeting his future wife there, but he's playing a gig to I don't know 150 people in a small hall. I show up to sound check. I'm like, I'm not messing around, right? So it's just Galway Arts Festival, beautiful time. I pop in through the back door there, kitchen door or something. I come in around the corner. There's John Prine sound checking. I don't look too threatening, so I'm able to just kind of sit down and watch him sound check a bit. I know that he sound checked with an Elvis song. That's all right. He might have started the set with it that night too. It might have been a thing he was doing, but I will tell you this: he was by himself on stage, so just him and a guitar. And turns out he's quite in love. He's falling in love at the time with Fiona, and I kind of show up and I just shake his hand and thank him and tell him what I'm doing. And he's just very cordial and kind, smiling and in good spirits, And everybody shows up to the show. I'm in the front row. Everybody shows up, watches the show, and then we make our way back into one of the coolest towns and eras of a town ever. That's Galway, Ireland. It's this, magical place. The Water Boys are playing, out on the Aran Islands. It was just one of those times of like, yeah, man, there were no cell phones. There was no laptops. I had the same Gibson guitar. I was playing on the streets, For all I know, John Prine was out there during that time too. But it's just like, for me, I learned, it was like one guy by himself can do this, That's what I learned then. Years later, I saw him and met him on the Cayamo cruise ship, where I was the guitar player in Amy Speace's band. So it took a rare gig for me where I go sidey. I really just want to get on the boat, I want to get on the boat and be around some of my heroes and just, hang out with great songwriters. That Cayamo is about great songs, let's face it. And so Prine's on there. He plays 4 shows. I go to every one of them. Turns out Buddy Miller also is everywhere. Like there's a couple of us that I'm like, yeah, I'm here. And the first one, he sings hello in there. I start crying, whatever. It just happens. Great emotional feeling. I go back, next show I go in, he sings hello in there. I start crying again. Third time I return, I'm like, wow, I really must need to work something out here if I'm going to see John. Knowing full well I'm going to start getting emotional during the show, but I was just like, I could not help it. It was something really cool. And that's where Prine and Lucinda Williams meet in this thing for me. And I would say Joni Mitchell, to get off the subject a little bit, and Iris DeMent sometimes too. Like they'll sing something and I'm just like, it just comes, the waterworks. And I don't feel that way when I listen to John Prine's records. But I did that night when he would sing that song. It was something about it. And then like knowing that such a young man had such perception, like that art right there is a big one. That's like Hemingway stuff or so. I don't know, I don't know. People might be offended by the Hemingway Picasso references, but these young men that were so in tune, young women too. Lucinda Williams is one of them, that they are able to just spell out the human condition and all our emotions, pains, fears, happy, and darkness in a couple of verses and a chorus and tell a story. That was it for me. I was like, sign me up. I want to learn how to do this, and get better at it.
I started making trips to Nashville. Try to meet with publishers and things like that. It's just trying to learn about that world and see if I could get some kind of writing deal or something, or just find out about it, or just see what people thought of my songs and all. So I came down here and only could meet with a few people. I didn't have a lot of connections. So I met with just a couple people, and one was like a guy at BMI, which is like they're just cheerleaders, really. You know, that's not really in the business. You know, you're not going to get a publishing deal from them. So that you wouldn't think that meeting would go anywhere, really. Except he happened to hand it was a cassette tape, because this was 1989. He happened to hand that tape. He thought one of my songs was really entertaining, I guess. He handed the tape to a guy named Keith Sykes, who lives in Memphis and who is an artist, but also a producer and sort of a publisher and this and that. And Keith happened to be working with John Prine right then. And so Keith showed the song to John Prine, and I guess Prine liked it, and somewhere in there they started playing it. Keith told me that John liked it and was jamming on it, and that they might record it, I guess. And so then I made like my second trip to Nashville or something. And I think Keith must have told me, hey, we're going to record your song this weekend in Memphis, you know. And so I came to Nashville and I was meeting with somebody, and I thought, well, man, they're going to record my song. I should just go there, you know, to Memphis. So, and I was with my girlfriend at the time too, and we drove to Memphis, and went to Kiva Recording Studios, where Keith Sykes was in there recording with John Prine, and they said, well, we just recorded your song a minute ago. We'll play it for you in a minute here. And so I met John Prine right then and there, and he had just recorded my song, and you know, I talked to him a little, not at great length or anything, and I just kind of hung around. They played me the song, and that was my first cut ever. So it made my knees go weak to hear it coming back at me. And they had played it just like we played it. Like they copied everything off of our recording. The intro, which was just everything on it was just off the top of my head, you know. Boom, all of it went down exactly, except he didn't sing it like exactly like I do, but I think it's just because he didn't spend a ton of time with it, you know. I remember they pointed out the steel player to me and said his dad played with Hank Williams, and he was a great big guy. And I don't remember anyone's name now that played on it. I guess this is 33 years ago now, you know, that happened. But then, and that was a time when John was in between records, and down the line, his next record was going to be The Missing Years. I mean, he didn't know it yet, but that was going to be his next record. And so after he recorded my song, all the reports I ever got were that they really liked it, and it's going to be on his next record and everything. And then as they got recording more things and got closer to that record, they sent me, Oh Boy Records sent me a letter saying that my song was going to be on the record and that they needed my permission to print the lyrics or something like that. And so, but they misspelled my name. So I wrote back to them and I said, yeah, you got my permission, but please get my name right. You know, here's how you spell it. And I waited a little while, and then I called them, I think, Oh Boy. And they said, oh, you know what? It's not going to be on the album, as it turns out. It's after all that. And that was after like a couple of years had gone by. And I'm telling people, yeah, John Prine recorded my song. And people are like, who? And that's how you find out whether or not people are super famous. You know, people are like, who? You know. So Missing Years comes out. It's his biggest record, or one of his biggest records, and my song's not on it, you know. Then one time I was playing at the Bluebird in the first year or two that I was living in Nashville. And I was doing an in the round with some people, and I look over and there's John Prine sitting at the bar. And I thought, I've got to get his attention. I'm going to play my song that he recorded. And I decided to play the song in front of him, and I did, but I'd have no idea what his reaction was. I sort of never looked up at him or anything, and he didn't speak to me. He didn't say anything to me, and I don't know when he left or anything, but that occurred where I played it right in front of him, you know, trying to get his attention. The next time I had any encounter with him, I was at the Sutler, the old Sutler, not the one that just closed. And there was a pool hall downstairs. It's still there, I think, the billiards place that's downstairs. And John Prine used to go down to that billiards hall, I think, a lot. And so I was standing by the window, and I actually saw him going down there. I think he was carrying his pool stick, like in a little bag or something. And I saw him walk down there, but you know, out through the window. And but I certainly wasn't going to say anything to him. Okay, then after a little while, I was to play on the stage at the Sutler with my band, and some people I knew went and got him. They were like, you got to come upstairs, Tim Carroll, you know, blah, blah, blah. And So he came upstairs, and right when he walked in, I think the way I remember it, my band had kind of a train wreck ending to a song. So that was great. You know, he thinks we're great then. Probably not. So anyway, we finished, and I just got my stuff off the stage, and I could see that people were bending John's ear over there, as everyone always did. You know, people saw everybody has to come up and talk to him, right? And I'm the kind of that won't do that a lot of times. I'll just stand back and let them have their life a little bit, you know? And I mean, once in a while, yeah, I will go talk to people, but I tend to be pretty low key about that. And so I wasn't really going to say anything to him, but he came over to me and he said, hey, that I still really like that song, and it's going to come out someday on something of mine. And I was like, okay, that's really cool. And we just had kind of a short conversation, but I remember he said that to me. And then a couple years later, it was about, I think it was like 1995, they put out an album called Live on Tour. And although my song was not live, it's on there. I think he does like 10 live songs, and then there's like 3 studio cuts that he had laying around, and mine being one of them. Oh, the song is called If I Could, Then I Would. And I think the reason it did not get on the album was because it turned out that Howie Epstein produced the album, and he had not produced my song. He had not produced the session that had my song. Because I think my last experience with John was that in that pool, or at the Sutler that night when he spoke to me that night. And then not again until when we opened for him like 4 times or something like that in those related. And then he kind of spoke to me. He kind of seemed to know who I was. Oh, but I think the reason why he knew who I was because Dave Jakes started playing bass with John. No, I moved to Nashville. Dave was one of the huge bunch of people that I met right away. And that's before he was playing with John. And then maybe about 4 or 5 years into me being here, Dave got the gig playing with John. And so anyway, he was tight with John. And I would imagine that when we were opening for John, that Dave probably said, by the way, her husband is Tim Carroll, the guy who wrote If I Could, Then I Would. You know, so John was like, oh, yeah, I remember this, you know. Otherwise, you know, he wouldn't have really known who I was, I don't believe. But I got to play the encore with them. You know, he does that with all of his opening acts. He always has the girls sing, what's it called?
In spite of ourselves.
In Spite of Ourselves. Every girl that opens sings that with John, and then I don't know if every guy gets to play guitar on but yeah, I think a lot of them do. And I got to play guitar with them on Paradise. So, you know, a pretty big thrill for anybody. You know, if you know John Prine, you know Paradise. You know that song. He was very, very nice. He was very nice the first time I met him at the Kiva studio in Memphis. You know, he puts on no airs. You know, he doesn't try to act like he's cooler than you, or he doesn't act like he's a big deal or anything. And it was that way, you know, the other time when I spoke to him, when he told me that he liked my song a lot too, he was just, he didn't have to come over and say that to me. You know, he just sort of a guy that he thought, I should say something to this kid, you know, whatever. And it wasn't really a kid, but I was younger than him. So definitely he was a very sweet man.
I would say that I could probably take the flag for the person who never met John Prine, who got the closest on the most occasions. Because so when I first started playing music, we had like a little bit of a cup of coffee where got courted by a couple labels, right? And some of them were in New York, and one of them was Oh Boy, because Oh Boy Records, John Prine's record label, God, he might have been an intern now at the time. He's an agent and a manager now for Vector, this guy named Josh Talley in Nashville. Josh was about my age, was a big fan of my music. He might have been more than an intern at Oh Boy at this time. And so he makes this big push for me to be signed to Oh Boy Records. Oh Boy Records at this time is being run by Prine's longtime manager, Al Bonetta. Al Bonetta, where do you start? First of all, rest in peace. He's no longer with us. Al was like an East Coast Italian guy. And I think I'm getting this correct in that he told me once that before he managed John Prine, he managed something along the lines of like a roller skating chimpanzee or something. Might have not been like a roller skating chimpanzee, but like he managed like some sort of like carny act, basically. I don't think I'm making this up. Like, now that I'm telling you, and like this will be published to the internet, it makes you a little bit self-conscious to say something so outlandish like that. But Bonetta was involved in some way with like this, just like the entertainment business, not the music business. And he has said something along the lines to me where he was like, I was managing the Chimp, and then I heard Sam Stone. I dropped the Chimp the next day. You know what I mean? Like something along those lines. And so the big deal was we were going to fly down to Nashville, and we were going to meet with Oh Boy Records. Of course, you don't get to just meet John Prine. John Prine is like the carrot at the end of the stick for all this. So we go meet this guy, Josh, who was working at the label, who was the big fan. And we meet Al Bonetta, who is in his office and who he was clearly not interested really in signing me. Like, he had made all the money he needed to make, you know what I mean? He was later in his career. It was just like, okay, the guy that runs my label day to day is interested in like signing a younger act. So I go in and meet him in his office, and we kind of get along in a way. Like we kind of develop a little bit of a rapport. He goes, would you like to come out to my farm later tonight? Like, yeah. And he was like, do you like hot rods? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, the last time I thought about, a hot rod was watching like Home Improvement in 1997, with Tim Allen. Like, I don't, a hot rod is not really my vibe, but whatever. So we go out. He lived, I don't know, where all the people who made money in Nashville go to, Franklin. Yeah. So he lived in Franklin. So we go out, and he had a farm out there. And the first thing that we see is his wife they have pit bulls, and I can see it in my mind's eye. So I know that this happened. She was around the perimeter of their property it was a golf cart without a canopy on top. So it was like one of those golf carts that kind of go fast. And she had 3 leashes on 3 dogs, and the dogs were running full stop, and she was in the golf cart behind them, like going around the property like this. It's an intense vibe. You know what I mean? You're like, wow. I think they were pit bulls. They were like aggressive animals. And there's this very nice house at the top of a hill, and at the bottom of the hill, there was like small airplane hangar, as if you owned like a Cessna or something like that. Al welcomes us as me and my manager at the time, and he was like, come with me. Let's go to my little, my man cave. And he takes us into this airplane hangar, and you open the door, and it's like, I'm sure this isn't the case, but in my mind's eye, it wasn't even like a switch he hits, like one of those flip, like from cartoons, like the way that you would turn on like the electric chair in a cartoon. He flips this thing, and these floodlights go on, and there are dozens of completely cherry hot rods of all different stripes on like this beautiful, just the poured like enamel concrete floor that they're on would have cost more money than I've had in my entire lifetime, much less the hot rods on top of it. And he was like, here are my hot rods, Joe. You got to check out these jars of weed that I have now. And he went over and hit these huge ornate jars of weed, like in the kind of weed that just has like, like neon hairs on it and shit, like the kind of stuff that you're like, I'll have an identity crisis if I smoke this with him. So he's like, I'm going to roll a joint, and then you want to come with me in a hot rod? I think what he was trying to do at the time is I think he was kind of like trying to like separate me from my manager at the time. Smart move. I was like 24 years old. So we get in this hot rod. He lights up a joint, and we go tearing around what must have been Franklin, Tennessee or something like that at night. And I'll never forget the piece of wisdom that Al Bonetta gave me that night. He's going around. He's talking about all these different stories of John Prine over the years. And he goes, we come to a stop sign, and his joint had gone out. So he's trying to light the joint. And he goes, Joe, never trust anybody who says, trust me, unless they're saying, trust me, I don't give a fuck. Lights the joint, clicks the track. And we go tearing off in the hot rod again, It was, I mean, he told me that 15 years ago, and I can hear it. I can hear it. And I can remember sitting at the stop sign, completely dark, no street lights somewhere in Franklin, and him saying that. And he's gone now, but, So that was, anyway, long story short, Al would then offer us a record deal that was completely untenable. Like, it was just like, because he wanted to take like a lot of my publishing. It's like, well, I'm 24 years old. I can't sell you my publishing in perpetuity, Al. But he was very gracious about that. It was kind of one of those deals where he was one of those old school music business guys that you could tell was like trying to like kind of get one over on you, but was kind of doing it in like a straightforward way. Like it wasn't like a weaselly way. It was kind of, he was just like, I'm trying to get one over on you here, Joe. You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, well, I'm not going to let you, do that. And so it didn't end up working out. I wouldn't sign the deal. And then Bonetta immediately, kind of played hardball in that way, which is, as we were talking about the record deal, it was all like, wow, John's got a lot of shows coming up. It's like you sign with the label, you get to go, presumably go play with John Prine. But, Al, that all got shut down after that, completely understandably. That's how business works, man. I get it. Then years later, so I missed out on my chance to meet, my hero, John Prine, at that point. I get it. Totally cool. No problem. Years later, I got a chance. The Ann Arbor Folk Festival called me and they were like, we'd like you to MC the festival. And I'm not an MC. I don't want to MC. But they said you would introduce all these artists and you get to introduce John Prine at the end. And it was like, listen, I don't want to travel. I got little kids, man. I don't want to travel from my house to Ann Arbor to not play a gig and just go MC something. But if I get to introduce John Prine, I'm there, man. So I take the gig, I go out, I spend all this time like working on the script for the gig to introduce all these different artists. And I introduced all of them. And then on night number 2, Prine was there and he was going to come in from stage right. He was in the wings in stage right and I'm on the wings in stage left. And I'm there with the stage manager. And I've introduced all the other artists for the festival so far. And I'm there with the stage manager. She's like, ready to go. And then Prine's longtime road manager, Mitchell, comes over. He just breezes right over. He's a professional, obviously, because he could tell what was about to happen. And right as I'm about to like take a step on stage, I just feel a hand on my chest. And then he says, not to me, but to the stage manager, he just goes, John Prine doesn't do introductions. That was it. Lights go down. He walks on stage. And I get it. You know what I mean? John Prine has earned the right to not be introduced, and his tour manager, it's your whole damn job to, if your artist doesn't want to be introduced and he's the headliner, he better not have some clown from PG County, Maryland jumping on stage. And I had this whole like ornate biography I was going to read about John Prine as if anyone needed that, So it was the right call in the end. But then at the end of it, so Prine plays a great set and he goes, well, any other artists who are here tonight that want to come up and sing Paradise, come on up. So got to jump on stage with, a dozen other people that had played that night and technically be on the stage singing Paradise with him and got about 12 feet from him. He acknowledged me, he gave me a nod and, I think that's about as close as you can get to meeting John Prine without meeting him.
I think it was 2012. We were playing some club in Galway. I can't remember the name of it. It was really a fun, kind of a nightclubby kind of place. It was not a bar, but it was like not a theater either. It was a nightclub. And John and Fiona came to the gig. And they were sitting up in the balcony and we knew they were there and we were so excited that they had come. I knew that they had a house, not far from Galway. And so they invited us to come up after the show, and we went up and hung out and talked to them. Then they invited us over the next day to visit their house and hang out. And John said, oh, by the way, you ought to open some shows for me. And I said, I think so. We should. We would love that. So we went out with him and did a little Southeastern run a couple of months later. And he also invited us to come play with him. We were both playing Cambridge Folk Festival a few days after that gig. And he said, why don't you come sit in with me at Cambridge? And so we kind of got to know both of them that way. But I mean, to be invited to their house to hang out the very next day, they're just the most warm, welcoming, real people. And the whole time we were at the house the next day, John was working on an old radio that he had. He was like tinkering, trying to get it to work. And he was kind of going between that and he had this obsession with this reality show about pawn shops. that he used to watch all the time. And so he was kind of like going between this, and Fiona was the hostess, But John was kind of like doing his thing and coming, going back and forth. And it was so wonderful to be so welcomed by both. That's just the way they both are, the way he was and the way she is. He loved oysters. He loved raw oysters. And we do too. And so occasionally she would just call and say, let's go have oysters or something like that. It was never a big thing. Or I remember she invited us they had a Christmas party at their house in Nashville. And I brought my son who didn't know them. And it was just, we walked in and it wasn't a big party. I realized as we walked in, oh my God, we were just kind of invited. There's the family and a few friends. It wasn't like a big music business party, And that was kind of the way he was. He liked what he liked, and he'd been through enough shit to know what he liked and what he didn't like, and who he liked and who he didn't like. So you really felt like, if you were invited to his house like that, it's not because of any kind of machination of, who's cool and who's not, or who, he just either liked you or he didn't. And he lucky for all of us, he liked a lot of us. And, I have another memory of him, that same Irish trip, when they came to see us in Galway. That next night, I think it was, we all went out to dinner. He invited everybody, like his whole entourage and us, all of us out to dinner. We had oysters. And then we went to this pub in Kinvara on the west coast of Ireland to just play music. And there was maybe 4 of us that had been at the dinner, 1 Irish artist, 2 Irish artists, John and me. And then there were some other local musicians that kind of showed up because the word gets around. It's a tiny little place and the word gets around. And we just started, having a session. I mean, just going around, everybody doing songs. And Declan O'Rourke, I remember I'd never heard him before, and he just blew me away. Everybody was great. But John, every time he came around to him, all he wanted to do was sing Merle Haggard songs. So he never sang a John Prine song, which I get that, because when I'm in that situation, I would much rather sing cover songs and old songs that I used to sing that I love. So all night long he sang Merle Haggard, I was in heaven because I know all of the Leona Williams harmony parts, But that was just, there was absolutely no pretense about him. And I think in some ways it's like his Midwesternness. It was so fully formed in him. He was very Midwestern, very just earthy, practical, funny, wry, but no pretense, no bullshit. We talked about meatloaf a little bit. I'm not a big meatloaf fan, so we talked about oysters more. But he had his, he definitely, he liked what he liked, and he was. I think we actually went out for meatloaf once. I didn't have the meatloaf, but we went to there's a place in North Nashville called Al's, and
my favorite breakfast place.
Yeah, it's awesome because we live so close. We can just be there in 3 minutes. And I think we went to Al's once, and of course he had the meatloaf. I think I went for something else. I'm not sure what it was, but yeah, he has very specific food favorites, and like to enjoy them. I think that's the other thing is, like when you watched him on stage, I remember at Cambridge Folk Festival, it's a big audience, big stage. And I remember just watching him and thinking, he is really enjoying himself. Like he doesn't have that edge of trying to be John Prine that you see in some artists when they're on stage. You kind of, it looks like fun, but it also looks like they're walking a tightrope. With John, it looked like he was in his living room. Like he's just enjoying this. And I just think that is something to shoot for. If you're a performer, to be comfortable enough in your skin and with what you do and who you are, and also what a wonderful thing to be in that position at that point in your life, in your career, when you got nothing to prove. You got nothing left to prove. Why not enjoy the hell out of it? And I saw it again with him. I mean, one of the last times I saw him was we played at his All the Best Fest in the Dominican Republic. November? Yeah, it was my birthday, so it was November 2019. And he just invited musicians that he loved. Just come on down, perform for the audience that's there, and have fun. And the last show, finale, we all, 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 or 3 by 3, came out and played one of his songs for him. And he took his chair and he put it squarely center, kind of backstage, not so that he was like right out in front, but he was totally visible, to the audience, and just dug it. And he was singing along, his own lyrics, singing along with everybody that came up to sing, And I watched him and I just thought, he knows how to enjoy this. And it gave me a lot of comfort, actually, after he died, knowing that he found so much pleasure in what he did, and that he did enjoy himself. So, I mean, that I really think, if I could give a young performer advice, it's like, just figure out a way to enjoy this. And if you're uncomfortable, figure out a way not to be uncomfortable, because you think that this is a career and you have to do certain things a certain way. It's also your life, and it's going by. And if you don't enjoy it, what are you doing here?
How did you find out about his passing?
I got a text from Fiona. I was, it was early days, really early days of COVID. We were in Florida. We had just sort of escaped and gone to our place in Florida where we could hide out. We could be away from people more easily because we live right in the middle of the city here in Nashville. And I got a text really late at night from Fiona that he wasn't doing well. And the first thing that I heard from her was that she had gotten COVID probably on the flight back from Paris. He'd wanted to play a gig in Paris, and it was just like something he really wanted, and he wanted to stay at the George Cinq Hotel, which is super fancy. And he did that. Thank God he did that. But I think that she thought that maybe they had caught it like coming back on the plane, or who knows. But so the first thing I heard is that she had it, and that she had isolated from him, and that he had been tested and it was inconclusive. And I thought, well, thank God, maybe they can stay apart, because I knew that, health-wise, he had so much, his health was so compromised that it wasn't going to be a good thing. And then I got a text from her that he was not doing well. And then we all just sort of were watching and waiting. And when I heard that he was stable, I mistakenly thought, that's good. He's stabilized. I just assumed that means you'll pull through if you're stable, right? Like you're sick, but you're going to pull through. And then the next thing, I can't remember the timeline exactly, but the next thing was another text from her that he had passed away. And I want to say that it wasn't unexpected, but it was, because I thought, no, he was stable, and he's been through so much, and he came out fighting. He's been through cancer, and I had lunch with him in Florida, like just 6 weeks before that, and I remember when we had that lunch. He got out of his car, and he had a cane, and Barry had just had hand surgery, and he was in a cast. And they just looked at each other and started laughing, look at us, old guys trying to still do it, I just thought that can't be right, but it was true. And that was the lowest point of the whole pandemic to me, was the day he died. It was just the lowest of the low. Like, how can John be gone?
John was zero pretense. John considered anybody that was in his sphere of presence to be equal to himself. And I think that that's one of the things that makes him the icon that he is he's so naturally relatable to every person. And he treated everybody equally. And when somebody has that level of celebrity, it's got to be difficult to do that. And he has traversed those waters of being a regular guy who sees everybody equal. And it's really extraordinary. My affiliation with John Prine goes back to my band that I had in 1993 called the Biscuits, being the first band that Oh Boy Records signed other than John. Like, I didn't even realize that until I was told by Eileen from Oh Boy Records about 3 months ago, because I knew we were one of the first. She's like, you guys were the first band that was signed to Oh Boy Records. Did you know that? And I was like, I should have known that. But so John's manager, Albinetta, is the one who basically saw us. And we'd only had, I think it was our third show or something like that. And he comes back and says, I want to put a record out on you guys. So therein begins our relationship with Oh Boy Records and John Prine. And John Prine's been a bud forever because he's really good friends with Roger Cook, a writer in town who's had much success. And I dated Roger Cook's daughter. And so basically he became kind of a family friend that we would see semi-regularly. Right. So I would see him kind of personally and professionally. And so, yeah, our relationship / friendship started in about 1992, late 1992. We were really lucky to have John at the Basement in 2018 because his Tree of Forgiveness record had just come out. And so basically, Grimey's worked out a scenario where if you bought the Tree of Forgiveness record, we created a new model whenever the Basement East opened, because oftentimes what you can do is, or what we would do is, if you buy an artist's new record, that gets you into an in-store performance. Well, in that case, you can sell about 200 records. But if you sell the record to people and tell them this gets you into a performance at the Basement East, then you can sell over 600 records. So we were like, okay. And we said, hey, John, do you want to come do a gig where you buy the record, you get into a performance at the Basement East? And he said, sure. And what was extraordinary about this was, like, most of the time the in-store appearances at Grimey's were like 30 minutes. But this was going to be a performance at the Basement East with the full band, everything. And we got the full show, like a 2-hour performance. And I don't even want to start crying right now because it was just, and it's been captured too. Maybe it'll see the light of day at some point. But that was another kind of career high where John, and he, I came back in the next morning to my desk and there were 2 white paper plates with doodles on them from John. And I was so like, oh man, that was so sweet. I mean, I talked to him for a few seconds backstage before they went on, but I come back the next morning, he's like, hey, he left these for you. And I'm like, oh man, that was awesome. So yeah, that was another one of those career highs. And, to have that full John 2-hour experience, that's the only full show I've ever seen him do. Yeah, because I saw him open for Bonnie Raitt years ago. He did an event out in front of the Oh Boy office whenever our record came out and a couple of other artists' records came out. We had a kind of an Oh Boy party with a bunch of hay bales and stuff, and all the bands played little short sets. But John came out and played 30 minutes solo and just blew everybody away. Yeah, and he guested on the stage here at the basement a few times as well.
You drew something on paper plates?
Yes, like personalized to me. The crazy thing is, I think that they got thrown away. Or I had them I got photos of them, but I was like, I'd been looking for them frantically. I was like, where in the fuck are? I mean, I guess I should have taken them home immediately, but whenever that happened, I was so busy that I stuck them in my desk. And somebody may have gotten in there and thought they were just two paper plates because if they were face down, then nobody saw that there was anything written on them. They might have just thrown them away. I don't think anybody actually actively took them from me. No, I've already said the things that just said, he was just this genuine person who treated everybody equally. And I mean, that really is the core of how I always felt. That somebody who had the ability to put words like that together has got to be somebody who, I always consider people who are super, super artistic, they're deficient in some area, and oftentimes it's like social skills. But he had the gift of words and the gift of relating to people, And it's really weird. I find it difficult to listen to John because I don't want to get sad. It should make me happy because all of his music is just so beautiful. But I find myself not gravitating towards listening to his records because I start thinking about him and I get a little sad. I can veer that way. I can listen to him oftentimes and just be celebratory about his life. But there are times where I'm like, I get really sad because I just think about his last days sometimes. I'm like, and what really looked like a turnaround. I mean, if you remember the series of events, like he was on an intubator, and then they were about to get him off it. They were saying that he's getting better. I mean, there were these reports that John Prine's getting better. I'm like, oh, good. I mean, and that was not the case. So this kind of false sense of optimism where John's survival was like hopefully coming back. I was like, oh.
My best John Prine story that I got, I think, and it's the most telling when people ask me what he's like. I tell this story, and that is, I did a tour of Europe with him. I can't remember what year it was, but it was a long, 8-hour flight, and then we got off the plane, and they sent somebody with a van to pick us up, and Jake's and Wilbur and myself and Mitchell, was a bit small entourage, like 6 people. And we get into the car, and it's this 25, 28-year-old kid, kind of cocky, I think, or, a little excitable. Didn't seem to really know who John was either, or to my liking anyway, because I'm kind of a John snob. And anyway, to make a short story long, this guy fucking starts barreling down the highway, and Prine says, I'm pretty sure you're going the wrong way. And the kid says, no, it's this way. And all of us were like, But as soon as he did, John went, oh, all right. And he opened up the newspaper. And like an hour later, that kid said, oh, shit, you were right. And we had just flown fucking forever. And now we're going to turn around and drive another hour after having driven an hour. And you could feel the fumes coming off the entire entourage. At least in my stoner brain, I was like, boy, you can almost see the steam rising in this room. And again, this might have just been my perspective, but John didn't look up from his paper, man. And and at first I thought to myself, you just can't knock this guy off his square. But the more I've thought about it, it's deeper than that. It's like he doesn't have a square, And it's hard to describe him because I think he's a very special, kind of a touched by lightning type person. I wanted to try to be like him, and learned in the first 2 weeks of knowing him that no one was ever going to be like him. But yeah, like he didn't raise his voice. He didn't get ruffled. He didn't even breathe a weird sigh of weird anything. He just flipped the page of his paper and said to the kid, "That's cool." And I know he wasn't holding it back. I'm certain from what I know about him that in his brain, he wasn't at that time saying, "Calm down, John. It's all right. You know, be cool to this kid, have compassion." He just was doing that. That's my estimation. It's just who he is. He was reading the paper, you know, and the kid was, I fucked up. Yeah, we all fuck up. Yankees, Dodgers, you know. And we were pretty tired and beat up, and I'm sure that Dave Jakes and Steve Wilbur would tell you too that we were all kind of waiting for somebody to give the kid the old "I told you so" or "you fuck," you know. But it wouldn't have been right, you know. It's just it's amazing to see. Well, it wouldn't have been right. Lots of people would have at least snapped a little. Most of the people I opened for would have had no problem being a tool to that guy. You know, I like to think I'm nice to people. John's an exceptionally kind guy. He's, in my opinion, he's grateful for. He has a grateful heart. He's not threatened by people. He's been good to me. He was very good to me for a long time. Then I had to leave. You know, I was with his company, but then I couldn't not leave at a certain point. And I think he understood, but I still, every time I'm around him now, I'm like, sorry. But I had to do it. I would have been a fool not to do it. So anyway, what were we talking about?
We talking about that wedding, and
Oh yeah, and then Guy Clark's story. No, that's my Guy Clark story. No. I'm not a diverger. That was I just saw him a couple of weeks ago at a thing, and he was like, "Are those flowers on your hat?" Like in like a condescending kind of way. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why?" And one time I went over to his house and played him a song, and he just was like, "I don't get that one. I just don't get that one." It's like, "Oh, God damn, can I lay down for a minute? Can't we?" I thought we were just going to be polite, you know. But that generation wasn't polite. They were really honest with each other. When I was a young guy, I made up 17 songs, and I gave them to John Prine and his manager. And they came back and told me there was one in there. Yeah. I threw out 16 songs, or however many it was. Started over. One time, Keith Sykes took me to, before I made an album, he took me to this thing called the Whole Damn Family Band. And it was Guy and Towns and John and Nancy. And I was just shocked because it was a surprise. He was surprised me. I didn't know that's what that band was. It was like a little bar. And it was interesting because they were all getting fucked up in the back room and shooting dice. All the singers were. Nancy too, like a fucking sailor. And Towns was kind of melting down. I don't even know what started me telling that. This is one of my other Guy Clark stories, though. And then afterwards, I got to go, me and Keith Sykes, Towns Van Zandt, and Guy Clark, John Prine, and some chick dressed as Santa Claus. Went to John Prine's house. And you ever see that movie where they got that kid Spider that gets shot in the foot because he fucks up the drinks? The mob thing. I was like the kid. I was like the I made drinks, and they traded songs. That's probably my best Guy Clark story. That I got to sit in Prine's kitchen, and they were drunk, so they when one would hand the guitar to the other, they'd look at me and go, "What do you want to hear now?" You know? And I thought, I must have done something good in the other life. That was it. But then Keith said, play him one of your songs. And I played a song. I put a capo on the second fret, and I played my song for those guys. I was about 24. And when it got over, Guy Clark said, there was a pause, and then Guy Clark said, you didn't have to use a capo on that. You probably just could have done that in D. Never sang that song again. I won't even tell you what it was. 2 songs he's fucking knocked out of my fucking skull. But, you know, I still play the one that he didn't get. People yell for, but I think that he's, you know, I like, you know, I come from that school, and he agrees. We talked about it. I said, you know, after the wave of great rock from Elvis to Stones, Beatles, some people want to go all the way to Kurt Cobain, but I'd probably end it pretty quick. Dylan, you know. And then there was the little wake that went over into country music when you had Waylon and Willie and Guy Clark and Billy Joe Shaver. Or this shit that we do, you know. There was a time in this country's history where the finest minds of the time wanted to be what we are. You know, we're not that. I'm not. You might be, but you know, the people that were going to come along behind Guy Clark and be as good as Guy Clark are doing computer shit. Sorry. You're left with us, bud. Yeah. And we're doing the best we can.
When I look back on it now, he was in a very productive period of his songwriting life. He'd been on major labels at this point, and for several years had been on Elektra, and had big budgets to record and spent all that big budgets. And that label deal was up, and his manager was looking for another big label deal. And meanwhile, Steve Goodman, who was John's best friend, had leukemia, and Steve didn't, and his deal was up too, but Steve realized he didn't have all the time in the world to wait for the next big record deal. So he decided to just start his own label called Red Pajamas. He had a very nice sense of humor about his illness because he was always in pajamas. We were riding around one day. He said, I think I'm going to start my own label too. I said, well, what are you going to call it? He said, oh boy. I said, no, what are you going to call it? Oh, I said, oh boy. Oh, okay, oh boy. And after Buddy Holly sort of tribute. And so we decided the very first thing we were going to do was, it was summertime, and we recorded 2 Christmas songs, because this is the way you do Christmas recordings. You do them in the summer, and they come out in the winter. And we did Silver Bells, and then we did I Saw Mama Kissing Santa Claus. John Prine loves Christmas. He has a Christmas tree up all year round at his house, as long as his wife will allow it, and very heavy into Christmas lights and the whole thing. So we had a lot of fun doing that recording. We got Rachel and her brother, found out they could tap dance, so we recorded them tap dancing. And we got this wonderful piano player from the Grand Ole Opry, Del Wood, very large, formidable woman. She had a big million seller of Down Yonder, down, dun, 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 like that. So we called her up and asked her to come in and play on it, and she did, you know. And that was Oh Boy 001. It came out on red vinyl, 45. It's a real collector's item. Picture of John on Santa's knee, you know, on the cover.
There weren't a lot of people starting their own labels at this.
No. He was way ahead of the pack, way ahead of it. And
why did he want to at that point?
Well, at that time, you know, it began to dawn on people that the money they were spending, these big budgets and the limos and the whole 9 yards, you know, that was their money. It wasn't the record label's money. The record label acted as if it was their money, But it wasn't. It was your money. And you owed them all that money. And you were never going to see any royalties, that way. The only records of John's on a major label that made any money were the first ones on Atlantic. And they were very simple records. And those were the songs that got him established, totally established. All the songs, Sam Stone, Hello in There, all those songs. Those are on the Atlantic recordings. But so when he went on his own, we just started out very simply. We were making demos, basically, of these songs of his, but they're good songs, and Only Love, that's a song he wrote with Roger Cook and Sandy Mason, a beautiful song. And I wish I had a record label here to read the titles, but that became the first album. And then shortly after that, we did another one called German Afternoons, which is a strange title that none of us really understand why he calls it that, but that's up to him. And by that time, he wrote Speed of the Sound of Loneliness, one of his very, very best songs. And he was just in a very good period of writing. And we were all just ready to play whenever he wanted to record. As I say, we were working on this, what became German Afternoons. When you ask John about sometimes song titles or in this case, this album title, I said, where did that come from? He said, well, I made a list of potential titles and I showed it to my mother. And his mother was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And she liked that one. And it might have had something to do with his Army experience. He was stationed in Germany in the Army. But we had another confirmation of it. There was a good German restaurant here in town called the Gurf House. And occasionally John and I would wind up over there in the afternoon, and they had these big, what called fish bowls of beer, good beer. And we were in there one afternoon and went in around 2 and came out around 5. And I said, I guess that was a German afternoon. It's just stupid stuff like that. But anyway, we were working on that album, and the cover, we spent quite a bit of time on the cover photograph. This wonderful photographer, Jim McGuire, who's well known for all of his work here in Nashville for the last 40 or 50 years, taking pictures of all the people that make the music here. He was taking pictures. We set up, if you look at the album cover, you don't know what this is about. There's a refrigerator. John's sitting on a chair looking into a refrigerator door open that has a light in it. Well, getting this set up out on a hill with the sun set behind him. I mean, setting this thing up was a piece of work. We had to get a truck to bring the refrigerator up there. And
is this John's idea?
I don't know whose idea this was, but somebody's idea. At any rate, we got that far with it, and then some point, and we re-recorded Paradise for this album, and it was in more of a little bluegrassy flavored treatment of it. I had parts of the Nashville Bluegrass Band, played Stuart Duncan and Alan O'Brien on it, and had a really good feel for it. And that song Paradise, of course, is, one of John's best known songs. And so he said, do you want to, we hadn't decided on album cover. We were still taking pictures and things and thinking about it. And so he said, let's go up to Paradise. He said, let's go up to Central City. This area of Kentucky is one of these musical hotspots in America that just looks like nothing when you go there. This is the home of Merle Travis, Ike Everly of the Everly Brothers' father, the Prine family, Bill Monroe not too far away, Yeah, so it's quite got that vibe about it musically. So we went up there, and John's, I think it's a 49 Ford Coupe Red that he'd had totally restored. Three of us, me and McGuire and John. And so we pulled into the Rambling Rose Motel there and get in a room, our rooms, and went out. And we're in John's room, and he's got some vodka, and we're having a drink. And around 1 a.m, he says, "Well, would you fellows like to go to paradise?" Yeah, of course we would. So we got in the car, and it was wintertime, and it was dark, of course. I mean, we're driving along, and he's pointing out on our left, we could see this there's trees there. He said, well, there's just a skin of trees to hide the strip mining, you know. So anyway, and we finally come around a corner, and there's a big power plant there, coal power plant, and mountains of coal, and all lit up, of course, and lots of signs, and a big sign saying Paradise Power Plant. This is Paradise, Kentucky. This was a village right there, and it's on the Green River. John went past those no trespassing, no entry signs. We drove down this very rutted, it had been muddy and now it was frozen ruts, down to the Green River, where Paradise lay. And this is where his parents came from. And what happened, and later on I rode around that area with John and his mother. And she said what they did was come into a village like that, the coal company. They wanted to get rid of these people, and so they could strip mine. And so the deal was they would go see the oldest people in the village. These are little shotgun houses, little wooden shotgun, probably 3-room houses, you know, very simple, and offer them $5,000. And that's the only money these people were ever going to see in their life. And the other people didn't feel it was their role to stand in their way. So they would pick off the older people, and the younger people eventually got the picture. And that's when the Prines moved to Chicago. And that's when everybody in that area moved somewhere as part of the Great Migration that, you know, Bill Monroe and his brothers, they went up to Gary, Indiana. And so we were down by the Green River, you know, where Paradise lay, the song, and we hear the sirens going off, whoop, 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 like that, you know, and we see a big Suburban, you know, big Chevy Suburban coming our way. We get back, McGuire's taking pictures all the time, and we get back in the car, and we started heading back, and they're heading towards us, and we come abreast, and John rolls his window down. They got their window down. He just says, I was just showing my friends here from Nashville where things used to be, and rolled up the window, and off we drove. In this 49 red Ford Coupe. And it was Twilight Zone all the way, you know, totally Twilight Zone. And I'm sure those guys were wondering, what is this about? But it didn't work. And now, you know, and the line is the world's largest shovel, you know, and came in there and they tortured the timber and whatever, did all the land and wrote it all down to the progress of man. Well, that world's largest shovel very beautifully dug its own grave. They couldn't get it out. It's still down there, and they covered it up. And people go there every year and stand around and sing Paradise. Isn't that something?
That was the great Jim Rooney telling stories about his friendship with John Prine. You saw a book sitting next to the tape recorder. That's Jim's book, and I highly recommend you go pick up a copy. It's a great read, and he's had an amazing life. But thank you guys very much, and I will talk to you soon. Much love to you.